Coming up on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show.
I think it's important that when you start, prove that the concept is legitimate first. So do it, bootstrap it. Do it as quick as possible just to get a proof of concept running. Because really the problem is the business problem. So don't worry about the sensors, like you said. Don't worry about the hardware as much. Really worry about that data and the value that that data can bring to your business.
The IoT platform is such an overloaded term that its meaning has been lost. Chipset manufacturers, sensor manufacturers, software vendors, consortia, and system integrators all have their own definitions. But if you come at it from enough angles, eventually a form takes shape and you realize it means what you want it to mean, and what's important is not the definition, but the context in which it's used. In this episode of the IoT Business Show, Dr. Sean Lorenz and I go through the elusive IoT platform and why the business problem is always the place to start.
All this and more on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show. The people, the business, and the technology of the next generation internet. This is the IoT Inc. Business Show. And now, here's your host, Bruce Sinclair.
Hello and welcome to the IoT Inc. Business Show. This show is made possible by sales of my book, IoT Inc., published by McGraw-Hill, and the IoT Inc. Certified IoT Professional, or ICIP, online training and certification program. Become a certified IoT professional by completing the program's 3 courses: ICIP Technology, ICIP Business, and ICIP Strategy and Digital Transformation. Details of which can be found at www.iot-inc.com. That's www.iot-inc.com.
With me today on episode 19 is Sean Lorenz. Sean is Director of IoT Market Strategy for Xively at LogMeIn. He holds a PhD in cognitive and neural systems and has shaped business models and product strategies in several emerging markets, including IoT, robotics, and MTech. Dr. Sean, welcome to the show.
Hi, Bruce. How are you?
I'm doing good. It sounds like you've had a busy week. What was the highlight of your week, this past week that just went by?
Oh, geez. Yeah. I was out at the Collision Conference in Las Vegas, which to a lot of people may not sound familiar, but you might.
No, what is that?
Yeah, so it was new to me as well, but I had heard of the Mobile Summit before. It's a big show out in Europe.
Okay.
And so what they did is they wanted to make something in the U.S. Around basically, tech and getting more. It's another tech conference, but they did a really good job. And it was kind of like Silicon Valley kind of transported to Vegas for a week or for 2 or 3 days. Right. And I was part of a subset of Collision called Enterprise X, which they said was somewhat of a Davos for geeks, which I thought was interesting. And it was great. A lot of really good people, a lot of amazing speakers. It was a conference.
Oh, wow. And so the focus was it like a Mobile World Congress, or like when you said mobile, what do you mean, like bringing what over to the US here?
Yeah, so I think the focus is a general tech kind of audience. Very startup focused, but they also had a lot of larger enterprise and bigger companies there as well. But the talks ranged anywhere from how to grow your team to how to build a drone, how to, grow your software SaaS product. Is all over the board, but is all very interesting.
Okay. Now, what was your interest? Why were you there? What was your interest in particular?
So what I was especially interested in was talking about the IoT. So they brought me there for the Enterprise X section. Okay. There were a lot of roundtable discussions of people in the IoT who wanted to talk more big picture about the industry as a whole. What are some massive issues? Where are we heading? And kind of what leaders in the space kind of think about the next several years in the IoT.
Oh, interesting. Well, I mean, it's obviously spilling over into pretty much everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah.
IoT. Yeah. Well, listen, I'd like to hear a little bit about you. So tell our listeners about your background, in particular your background in IoT.
Sure. So my background is, like you mentioned, I have a PhD in computational neuroscience.
Okay.
So I studied brain-computer interfaces. So I was building an EEG headset for people with locked-in syndrome or ALS. As a lot of people know, to help once you get to a certain point, you're no longer able to communicate with your loved ones. So I wanted to build something that allowed them to use brain patterns to control words on a screen. So they can have a speech output back to communicate again.
Very cool. Now, what I didn't understand is, I mean, if you're just measuring the electrical activity on the surface of the brain, what's happening there? I mean, there's got to be a heck of a lot more going on underneath the surface, but you can't measure that, or can you still measure that?
That's the major problem. There's a lot of different ways. There are invasive and non-invasive methods. Using EEG, which, as you said, is just getting, the non-invasive on top of the skin.
Yeah.
But you can go invasive as to the point of putting an electrode within certain motor areas of the brain. But that only gets a couple neurons. So it's for very fine kind of movement. And also the brain does not like having things inside
in it. Yeah.
So there's a lot of issues on the hardware trying to figure that part out. And then there's something called ECOG, which is interesting, electrocorticography, which is a set of electrodes that you actually you cut open like a door inside the skull. You open it up and you slap it on top of the cortex.
Okay, so just a little bit closer then.
Yeah, they call that like semi-invasive, but that seems pretty invasive to me.
Little door in your skull, yeah. It's a little bit. Okay. And how did this? Okay, so now you're working on these neural interfaces, which I've seen some examples of recently. Kind of in the popular media.
Yeah.
What happened from there? Like, do you have like a neural interface to your IoT system over there at Xively, or what's going on?
I actually have an emotive headset on my desk, which I have been waiting to actually hook up, to the IoT. We wanted to control, one of our customers is Lutron, control the lights using brain patterns.
I thought you were going to say your little pink ears went up when you were happy and they went down when you were sad. Isn't there one of those that are on the market too? The Japanese one?
I'm sure that someone has already done this for the IoT, but it's something kind of gimmicky, but would be fun. Haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, no, I could see that as being, that could be really, really useful. Okay, so what took you from computational neural systems to the Internet of Things?
So kind of after I finished my PhD, I got involved with some other people in my department who were doing adaptive systems for robotics. Because, the core thing of what I did was very deep learning focused. Yep. So as it's called now. But what we wanted to do was create a startup, which turned it into, it was called Neurala, and we were part of Techstars, which was a lot of fun. And
cool.
And we were really trying to find a way to connect, how do you do cloud-based robotics in a way to take sensors and get it up to the cloud. And it was a really challenging problem, and Kinesis was just coming out from Amazon, and we were trying to find different tools to leverage as far as, do you use the GPU on chip on the bot? What do you do locally? What do you do in the cloud? And around that time, I started reading about this Internet of Things concept, which, and I asked some of the mentors around Techstars, I was like, have you heard of this Internet? And everybody's like, oh, nobody knows what that is. Don't worry. So I said, okay. But I started reading more and got more interested. So I left Neurala and started pursuing the Internet of Things and ended up here at Xively.
Now, I think if you squint your eyes, there's a lot of similarities between robotics and an IoT product, right?
Absolutely. It's I actually would consider many robots as IoT products.
Absolutely.
If you think about it, what creates, I would even put your smartphone in that case into that camp sometimes. Because if you think about it, it's what is an IoT product? It's something that has some sort of way of sensing the world around us. So it uses sensors to communicate information and take action on the world, or receive information from the world and have a two-way communication. Right. So robots fit that. Smartphones have accelerometers in it. They have all different sensors.
It's a big sensor array. Yeah.
That's right. So people, before we had even Fitbit, people were already using the accelerometer in your phone to kind of get some of that data while you run, so that you can kind of see the blurring of what IoT products are already. But yeah, I would definitely say robots are part of that ecosystem.
Now, I've recently discovered the field of cyber physical systems. Are you familiar with this?
No.
No? So look it up. I'm going to start getting into it in the show quite a bit because in fact, I think it's a good way of separating the technology when looking at it from a business point of view, when separating IoT technology from a business point of view. Because what cyber physical systems is, besides having a super cool name, it has heritage in robotics and then now in IoT. And what they're trying to do, the premise is this. So it's an NSF like hard science. So it's the real deal. It's getting funded by the government to the tune of not hundreds of millions of dollars, but tens of millions of dollars. And they're trying, because the premise is that the hardware has evolved separately from software. And when you try to integrate when you try to integrate software with hardware, and I mean integrate it, there are issues. And the biggest issue is the dimension of time, and trying to have, because in the real world, in the hardware world, time is really important. In the software world, it's abstract, and getting an exact time is very difficult from a programming point of view. Anyway, that's where a lot of the science is. But I decided to ask you because you might want to look it up. I'll put a link in the show notes for the listeners, but it's very cool. It has a super cool name, and it does kind of link the robotics and the IoT. And I think the way, when you break it down into a cyber physical system, you have a software-defined product, you have a hardware-defined product, you have the network fabric, and then you've got external systems that act upon it. And so it's kind of a cool way to look at technology as opposed to, the regular technology stack that most technologists view the world in. But I digress. So
that gets me into. I won't go into neuromorphic computing because that kind of.
What is that? What is that? You got to at least give you a definition anyway.
So I think that I would say part of that world is something called neuromorphic computing, which is actually MIT Technology Review just had a really good article on it.
Okay. We'll look it up,
Yeah, where Neurala came out of was the Neuromorphics Lab, and they worked with HP. There's also IBM and Hugh Research Labs. They're all starting to do something around this idea of neuromorphic computing, which is that, it's starting to blur the lines between that hardware and software layer as far as encapsulating a more massively parallel way of dealing with computation that is going to be required for robotics and for IoT-based data, where the memory itself is stored in something called a memristor. And it's a relatively new area of exploration where you can have communication across optic wires, or it doesn't matter what it is. And then the way the memory is stored, the memory is no longer apart from the computation. They're actually entwined so that you can actually embed memory directly into the compute power. And it's really fascinating. So it works like a synapse does in the human brain, hence the word neuromorphic computing. So it's a perfect way for IoT to kind of start, sending data, and it handles the time aspect so that you can understand, the trigger points of when something happens, so that you get better understanding of that temporal correlation. That's going to be really important, I think, for sensor data.
Yeah, no, very much so. Well, that's super interesting. I'll put a link to it in the show's analysis notes. Now, tell us, I always ask this, but tell us something that's super interesting about you that most people do not know.
Sure. I guess it would be, in a former life, before I totally geeked out with my PhD. I was one of the co-founders for the Independent Film Festival of Boston. So
cool.
I got to start a film festival, and I worked in the film world for a while, and that was a lot of fun.
Now, why did you leave the film world?
I loved it, but there was something, the geek side of me was not fulfilled, so I wanted to explore more.
You were left unfulfilled watching all those foreign films or those indie films, is that what you're saying?
Pretty much, yeah.
All right, well, let's swing this to the geek side of things, and let's talk about IoT. In particular, I want, given your background or given where you're working at Xively, I wanted to speak today. This is our second in a series of 3 episodes that we're doing on IoT platforms. Now, everyone throws around platform. It's an overloaded term. I want to get into the platform with you, or what some people call the AEP, the Application Enabling Platform. Mm-hmm. And first maybe draw a line around it. What are the components of an IoT platform?
Oh, geez, that is not an easy question.
No, it's not, is it? And that's the problem, and that's why we need to learn.
It is. I think it's a big problem. I think everyone and their mother now says they have a IoT platform. It's kind of an ambiguous term because right now in the IoT, we're not really sure what people need and what they want. So everybody says they're offering it all. So they just slap the word platform on it. And it's very analogous to kind of what has also happened in the 90s. You see the same kind of thing happening through every kind of wave of technology. We'll have some platform to do it because we're not really sure what to do with it yet. So it's kind of a catch-all term to say, hey, we can handle it. So I guess where I would start to see there's different types of platforms, but really I think what the IoT is going to need, there's going to be a segregation of what that means by platform. So since the IoT is, I think, just a concept, really what I think will matter is what is your business trying to do, and what part of the ecosystem do you want that platform to handle for you. So,
ecosystem. Okay, we got another overloaded term, but okay.
Yeah. So I think the IoT ecosystem is another one of those big buzzword ideas. Yep. But really, what I mean by that is just what partners do you need to use? What vendors do you need to use in order to create a complete solution for your connected product or whatever it is. So the platform layer, I think, of that, there's going to be multiple, I think, platforms that exist to basically help you build that full solution. You're going to use different vendors to do different things. Right now, everybody says they do everything, so they say there's one vendor to do it all, but that's not true.
No.
Where I think we're going to have is you're going to have platforms that handle connectivity really well. So getting your data up to the cloud.
Okay.
There's going to be platforms that handle the more management layer of things, as far as understanding how to, once you have the data, what do you do with it? Okay. There might also be security layers on top of that, and that's some companies might offer more than one of these, but I guarantee you'll start seeing specific platforms around these different things. One will be security based from the hardware up to the cloud.
And that'll be a platform, you're saying?
Yeah. In fact, I've already started seeing some startups that are trying to differentiate themselves by only handling that security layer across all parts of the system. And they're offering a platform to make sure that that's enabled from the firmware.
So the platform is a layer on top of another platform? Is that what you're saying?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
So
I'm just grokking it, but okay.
Yeah, so I think it's a partnership kind of deal where you would have one platform where whatever you have, you could on top of that use APIs that or different kind of standards with a different product, basically to make sure that you're handling things in the correct way for security. And then I think on top of another platform you'll see is more the analytics stack.
Okay.
And then I think the last kind of part will be how you engage with your customers. I think there's going to be platforms around customer engagement that we haven't really seen much as far as the different kind of possibilities there. But I would say that's kind of different areas that you'll start to see types of platforms. So I guess that's not really a good definition of the term platform, but I think the point is that
you're kind of going at it from a different direction though. But you're saying there's a connect. You're saying you believe that there'll be a connectivity platform. You believe that there'll be a management platform. You believe there'll be an analytics platform. And what was the other one I missed? Well, a security one potentially.
Customer engagement, I would say.
And a customer engagement one. Okay. So I guess it just depends on it goes back to the original question. I guess what's the definition of the platform? Because how can you have these multiple? So my view of a platform is that you've got one basis, and that's going to be one software body, however that's manifested, that you then build upon.
Yeah.
I don't know, you build upon a platform. How's that different from your view? Because now you're saying multiple platforms and multiple different parts.
Yeah, so I think it depends on, by platform, do you mean so let's take it from the view of someone who would be creating a product, a connected product.
Yeah, that's a good view, yeah.
So I would say that maybe they are stitching together their own platform in that case. But in order to build their platform, they're going to have to use multiple vendors who are platform providers.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So there's
no, I hear what you're saying. But this just goes to the crux of the issue,
yeah.
right? It's just like so damn complicated, or at least maybe it just hasn't. Maybe the definitions just haven't flushed out yet. Commonly, they're just not commonly recognized yet. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a mixture of both. I think it plays to the fact that yes, the field is. I mean, the IoT is very complicated because you're suddenly connecting everything. So we've kind of seen technology go from PCs and then mobile and then web and then mobile and then trying to connect everything. And the thing about the IoT is it's suddenly unifying a lot of different business systems and different kind of technologies that weren't united before. So it's causing a lot of tensions and trying to figure out who starts, where does one thing start, when does it stop, and where does it drop off and another one. So I think it's very, very difficult, and that's why I mentioned the IoT ecosystem. I do really think that is important, mainly not from the word ecosystem, but partnerships and vendors.
Almost like an ecosystem of platforms. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I guess it would be. It would be of platforms as well as hardware chip vendors. You're going to need a lot of different players to create a really successful product these days.
So I think we've successfully confused everyone listening. So now I think you said something. Important, however. You said many things important, but one thing I want to pull out on, or is tug on, is you said it really depends on what the customer is trying to achieve, or I'm paraphrasing it in some way. Right. So the listeners listening to us, and we're going back and forth saying, oh, well, a platform is this, a platform is that, I'm not really sure. Okay, from the perspective of someone building an IoT product, what's your advice on the platform? What are they looking for? What are they shopping for? What would be the approach then?
Yeah, I think the big thing when you're shopping for how to build something is look at what your product is and really start from what kind of thing you're trying to solve. What is the problem? Because if you're just trying to do something connected because it's the next cool thing, it's the wrong motivation. Right. So really have an understanding of what business problem you're trying to solve for your company. And once you kind of have a better understanding of what you're trying to do, are you trying to do something where you have a refillable play to have a competitive advantage or sell more units, or to decrease your roll time if you have a truck that has to go back and forth to actually clean something or pick something up? Mike Simon, our CEO at LogMeIn, has one that he's been using lately that I like. Is the shredder, the paper shredder that every big business tends to have. That's a pretty manual, simple problem where the paper fills up, and you have to have a guy come out and on a truck and take it to the facility and get rid of it. Right? If you had a simple sensor just to tell you when it's 75, 80% full, they can more strategically pick up that bin at the right time instead of wasting time. So these are very simple things. So like, let's say you're that customer and you're saying, well, I just want to put a sensor on my product to help our guys on the truck better know when to pick this up. So you've got a couple different things there. You have to have a hardware setup. You have to so you're going to need to think of a hardware vendor. You're going to think of someone to get that connectivity up to the cloud, and how you're going to do it. Are you going to need a network provider like AT&T or Verizon or one of those? Or are you going to go Wi-Fi or Bluetooth? Or maybe there's 10 in the office, so you want to do a mesh network to a node point that has a gateway to actually use Wi-Fi. So these are the different things on the hardware side. But then when you have to think of when it goes up to the cloud, you would need to have, that's the platform layer, I guess, for IoT. Who's going to be in charge of that information? And then also you're going to have applications for the business owner who might be sitting in the shredder, office somewhere, seeing what's happening from a global view. But then the truck driver is going to probably have an iPad app or something where they can see what they're supposed to do from their perspective. So there's going to be different ways, different parts of the organization looks at the information differently. But if you think ahead that this is what I want to do, this is the outcome I expect, you'll know what to build. So I would say from that perspective, you're going to need somebody to have a hardware, either a service integrator or somebody in-house that you're going to have build that. But then you're going to need a platform to handle the connectivity and management piece we talked about. And then you're going to have somebody either part of that IoT platform to handle the analytics, to create triggers, to make sure that the truck driver is going at the right time, and then an application developer to build that app, make sure it's also talking with that sensor data as well.
Yeah, so I think what we can agree on, what a platform is not, is it is not hardware. Or are we in agreement? Are we in agreement on that?
Absolutely.
Okay. However, you did bring up a point. There has to be some software that's in the hardware to be able to extract the information. Is that part of the platform?
Yes and no. I think it's so, like from Xively's standpoint, we have something called Xively Lib, which is you have to have, like you said, some bit of software on the board. So in our case, it's a small little C library, as a small footprint that basically takes the sensor data and then makes sure it knows how to get that to the cloud.
So it's like an agent, or what would you call it? Like generally,
it's a device.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah. So that's exactly what it is. But you still have to have that. Whatever IoT platform that you pick, you're going to have to. Almost every IoT platform that is enabling that connectivity piece will have some sort of agent that lives on the different kinds of board that you pick. So when you pick a board, you're going to have to know, okay, am I using ARM? Am I using, Freescale? Who am I using? And what IoT platforms are they partnering with? Right.
So you're saying, yeah, so that's an important part. So, yeah, and I think I'm going to get into this in a show in a lot of detail, but I think there's different schools of thought on where do you start? When you're building this product, do you start from the sensors? Do you start from the software, which I believe is really the right place to start, is basically the modeling, the application around it, and then applying analytics to that. do you start with, or you could also argue, well, the data is where the value is, so we got to make sure we get the data, and that means we have to choose, our chipset provider. But I think an important point that you're bringing up is right now, there's a relationship between platforms and chipsets, and they don't necessarily all work with each other then, right?
That's true. Although all the kind of major IoT platforms at this point have some sort of agent or a library with almost all the major chipsets.
Okay. So then you're not promoting then choosing the chipset before the platform, or are you?
Yeah. No, I think kind of what a lot of IoT platforms, us included, is we want to be almost embedded on that chipset, so that the developer doesn't have to worry about it. So they basically have their options already there. It's where they can pick what they want that best fits their needs. When you're doing a proof of concept, let's say you're a developer within a larger business, and they say, okay, we want to connect our toaster or whatever it is. So can you go off and find the best way to do that? Yeah. They're going to try a bunch of different packages. They're going to go get an Arduino or something. I think it's important that when you start, don't worry about, prove that the concept is legitimate first. So do it, bootstrap it. Do it as quick as possible just to get a proof of concept running. Because really the problem is the business problem. So don't worry about the sensors, like you said. Don't worry about the hardware as much. Really worry about that data and the value that data can bring to your business.
No, I definitely agree. I mean, and I think, that's one of the reasons for the purpose of this show is, it's called the business of Internet. I mean, it's about the business of Internet of Things because, what I've observed, up to this point in time has been to a certain extent the tail wagging the dog, where, IoT has all been about the T and not about the value, and how you create value. And I think I'm hearing the same thing, coming from you. It's like, yeah, you got to figure out the business. And then once you figure out the business, then you can then figure out how to implement that business. But you need to start, that needs to be the right direction. And I agree wholeheartedly also with the POC, because in all likelihood, that POC is going to change many times. It's going to change your thinking. And you don't necessarily want to, you don't want to be locking yourself, cementing yourself into something in particular at that point, because you may end up doing something very different than what you expected. And have you seen that? I mean, in the customers, that you've been working with, or what's been your experience there? I mean,
absolutely. I definitely feel like treat the POC as like an agile development tool. So especially when it comes to dealing with hardware. You have different form factors. You have different requirements. You may have an existing product that you want to, upgrade. But in order to do so, you'd have to switch out the board completely. Yeah. And in many cases, that's not possible to do when you have, a product that's been out in the field for 20 years. So there's a lot of issues around that. But you have to be working in that agile way, that methodology where you're okay with changing multiple times. And I think that's one of the problems, I don't know if you went to CES this year.
No, I didn't know.
Yeah, but one of the things that was an issue was this year was all about the connected product. But it kind of flopped. in a lot of
It did? Okay.
I would say not all of it, but there were a lot of products that I think everybody in the media was ready. If you read the reviews, this is more from the media perspective. I think it flopped because I think the expectations were much higher. And one of the reasons I think for that is I think companies wanted to be first to market, but didn't have the right reason for doing that. So that's kind of getting back to iterate on that POC and make sure that the business value is there first, and change it 5-10 times if you have to, but make sure that business problem is solved first before you go to market.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. I want just one last question on the platform, because I know we've been beating it to death to a certain extent, but I think it's important, to kind of dig in.
Yeah.
But when someone gets a platform, what are they actually getting? Are they getting an app? Are they getting a service? Are they getting, an API or an SDK? What is it that you're actually buying generally with a platform in all the different flavors that you mentioned?
Sure. So, I mean, I would say, just from my experience of where I think the IoT platform market is right now, usually what you're getting is, let's start from the device. You're getting a library, an agent that lives on the device that makes it easy to connect sensor data or metadata off the device directly to the cloud. And then once you have that in the cloud, you're usually, actually I should say before you get to the cloud, usually how you get that data up to the cloud or communicate with it via either your own application that you built in the cloud or some sort of interface. It's the API layer. So there are a lot of platforms that provide APIs.
And this is to basically connect the agent to the cloud. Is that what you mean?
Yes. So a lot of the kind of, I would say the most common way of doing that now is MQTT as the messaging bus that I think is becoming the most popular. Obviously, there are CoAP and some of the other protocols that are doing this as well. But MQTT seems to be the flavor du jour. And it works really well as long as you're able to put a lot of security and scalability secret sauce around it. But there's a lot of good uses for publish subscribe that works well for MQTT or for the IoT. So I would say that's the kind of API layer. Then on top of that, usually you can take those APIs to an AWS or whatever application you want, build out something yourself. But really, what the IoT platform wants and is helpful in doing is providing that kind of data. Cleaning up the data into nice dashboards, as well as ways to provision and manage all the connected devices that you now have online.
So is that so far we've got a library, and this is a library of agents, to be able to hook up into your different sensors. And what we've said is, different agents are required for different chipsets from different, from different manufacturers. We're not digging too deep into the different types of sensors, because obviously there's literally probably a million different sensors, but that's okay. So we've got a library. Then you're saying we have an API, and the API is going to help us basically connect that, interface it to a cloud service. And okay, so what is the third part then from a platform, a cloud service, that we're connecting this API to that has these nice dashboards and interfaces, or what else are we getting from here?
Yeah, I would say that's the next step, is the dashboard layer. As well as, I think there's like a dashboard and even control layer. So that's where you might manage batches of devices, make sure that you're setting up credentials in a certain way across groups of devices. So there's kind of like a user interface layer of what the APIs could do, but there might be a certain level of person within the company who may not be familiar with using the APIs at that point, but they might also want to see different types of data coming off it. There might be the product owner who's looking at it from a more global scale once you've deployed the product. So that's more like that user interface dashboard layer.
And that's basically a service that you're going to get access to, that the API connects to, right? So you're using the API from your platform provider. It connects to a service that you get as part. And are you being charged on what's the business model for? We'll get to that in a second. So now you've got a cloud service. Is that where it ends then? So we've got the library, we've got the API, and then we have a cloud service for a platform? Or I know that you've mentioned different types, but is that typically it, or is there more that you're getting?
I would say there's usually one more aspect.
Okay.
Well, I would say there's maybe two aspects. I think there's like an analytical layer on top of that, where you can do some sort of basic charting and reporting of the data, but also a big piece of the IoT is some sort of triggers or event processing. So there's a lot that has to happen on that piece. So I would say that's one, is the analytics component. And then and a lot of platforms offer that, at least in a very, very rudimentary way at this point.
Yes, right.
But then I would say the next one is kind of the business enablement aspect, which is a lot of, at least all of our customers to this date, have all wanted to, in some way or another, integrate with Salesforce or SAP or some sort of existing business system. So having the API that connects back into their working business systems is, I would say, the last piece of the puzzle there.
Okay. So we've got the library of agents. We have the API that's connecting up to the cloud service that you're getting from your platform provider. We have the analytics. Now, some of the analytics will be part of this service that you're getting as part of the platform. If you want to get more complicated analytics, then I presume there's another API that you'll be able to, that the platform would provide to be able to hook into something a little more complicated. Is that right?
Yeah, I would think it's either another API that lets you do more complicated things, or it might also go directly into that business system, like where you're just connecting right into Tableau or whatever you use.
Right. That could be your analytics itself,
exactly.
I suppose. Right. Okay. So and. So the analytics and then the business enablement is another API. So what we're talking about is a whole bunch of different APIs, and we're talking about a library, and then we're talking about a service. Is that an accurate way? If I'm just saying, what is it? All right. Now, what are the typical business models for the APIs, the library, and the service? What is it? How are you paying for this?
So a lot of the IoT platform market has been kind of a moving target as far as business models, and the pricing strategies have changed so much across us and our competitors. Everybody's trying to figure that out. Right now, I think most people are offering a license, yearly license kind of platform fee. That seems to be the going model. So you pay. Typically, it's not often, but usually it's kind of a per device fee that is sometimes has additional fees that might include if you're taxing it with bandwidth or number of messages. So the amount of storage, these kind of things. So those might be additional. If you're a nuclear reactor who, only has one device and normally you're charging $1 per device, that's not going to work. So
that sucks for you.
But they're every 5 milliseconds, sending data out at a crazy rate. That's not great.
That could be good for you.
Yeah. Right. But if you're a wearable has a very low kind of cost, you have to make sure your COGS are extremely low. You don't want to be spending $5 a device if your device costs $20. So you need to. Yeah. There's levers in there. It's not a tried and true kind of thing. Which is why I think the IoT platform pricing market is a little fuzzy. There's a lot of different ways you can do that, but I think overall, an annual licensing fee seems to be what most people are comfortable with.
Yeah, no, and I think that's been my experience as well. I mean, there's the annual licensing fee, and then as I think you put it in a nice way, then the tax, and then a tax in a sense. If you're using a lot of bandwidth or if you're using a lot of memory or storage, then there's a little bit extra there. Now, what about backhaul? Is this something that is bought separately and negotiated separately? Oh my gosh! Or is it something that's included as part of this license?
So what do you mean by backhaul exactly?
Oh, well, just basically the connectivity. I suppose it just depends on. I suppose it depends on the product, right? Mm-hmm. But if it's just connecting up to your Wi-Fi, then there's no cost. If it's something that's going to be in the home, but if you're having to do some cellular connectivity, which is often the best case. Although we've got some new technologies that are coming out. There's obviously a fee associated with connecting up to the cloud if you're not going through some premise device.
That's right. So I think as it kind of works now is that's a separate cost. Although a lot of the IoT platforms are all, I would say all of them, all the big ones are directly in communication with partners, with all the cellular carriers. So there are deals being struck, so that you can reduce those costs to make sure it's efficient for everyone involved.
Yeah, and there's also I don't know if you'd call it a platform, but then there's also another class of companies that are providing agnostic connectivity. So no matter where you are, under whatever circumstance, they do all the negotiation, with the carriers for you, and then they also manage it. They'll do the billing for you. They'll give you all the, the dashboard on that side of things as well. But that is, that has been my experience as well, that it's something that's separate.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Well, that's great. I mean, I think that's really helpful, is kind of describing it from different angles, and then talking about what you get. The next thing I want to talk about, Sean, was privacy. So, we've spoken not at length yet. We're going to get into it more on security. Basically protecting the integrity of your data. But I'd like you to maybe take us through what are some of the major privacy issues in IoT today. Let's talk privacy for a little while.
Sure. Yeah. I think privacy is something, it often gets conflated a lot with security, but they're definitely different topics, and they're both extremely interesting.
Okay, well, break it down for us. What's the difference between security and privacy? Let's start there.
So I think security is, understanding the threats of the attack layer of the device. It's trying to understand, how do you reduce the threat? And I think the difference between security and privacy is security is making sure that whatever product you use is not going to get broken into. The privacy issue, I think, is you assume that what product you're using is going to be okay to use without being messed with. But really, I think the privacy layer is what happens now between how you get messed with by the company and the consumer. So I think the privacy is actually an interesting and something that I'm very passionate about personally, is understanding we need a sort of user bill of rights to understand what is an open versus closed device, who owns the data, what data should be private, do we have user deletion, backup rights, how do you deal with things like predictive analytics, where the system is predicting for you a certain event, and what happens, who's at fault, or when things go wrong.
Yeah.
So, and one of the, I think, even biggest issues, I think, is we need something, in my opinion, is kind of like the nutrition label when you buy food.
Yes.
Where, you don't know what's under the hood, especially with IoT devices. There might be 6 different sensors inside that little black box, but you only know about one of them. And they might be collecting all this other stuff on you that you're not aware of. And I think that is going to be a big problem.
I like that. I like the nutrition label, and I like the Bill of Rights concept. And I've heard, I've kind of heard them in different ways, but you put it pretty nicely. Okay. So you brought up you rattled off a whole bunch of issues there, right?
So got a little soapbox there.
Yeah. No, that's okay. You're passionate about it, and I think it shows. So so some of the privacy issues that you brought up that I can remember, who owns the data, how is it being kept? How is it being used? How is it being backed up? Okay. So now, is this a policy issue? Is this a technology issue? And swinging back to the platform, is this something that, obviously you need to, the company who's, let's say we're looking at it from the perspective of making an IoT product, right? So the product brand needs to basically make some decisions. Is that where you start? Take us through that. So where do you go? Like, what has to be done?
Yeah, I think yes to all. I think it is definitely, the problem with trying to legislate this is, innovation is happening faster and faster. So
can't keep up.
Can't keep up. Something has to happen, I think, from the people creating this stuff to, make sure they're the ones kind of driving this, but also keeping the government informed.
Mm-hmm. And so this is where the transparency comes in, where you're saying basically, what you're calling like a nutrition label. The Bill of Rights is kind of coming from the other, it's coming from the consumer point of view. So you need to basically interface properly with that.
Yeah.
But so it sounds like, for an IoT product company, first of all, you gotta come up with your privacy issue. You then need to communicate your privacy issue. How do you now, is this simply a policy issue, or is there technology involved? How does the platform fit into this? Explain, is this just an abstract concept that you just need to write somewhere on your webpage, or is it something that actually is manifested in technology in some way or form?
That's a great question. I think it definitely is a policy issue, but I think it's also something in the technology itself where making sure that you have code that kind of represents this ability to let people opt in, opt out, is also, and basically give them understanding within the user interface in a nice way that helps them know what is being used and how it's being used. So this is kind of I know that's kind of abstract, but
well, give us an example. Try to think of an example, perhaps a customer example, or use case where you could clarify it for us.
So I think for example something like the Nest. That's an easy one. You have something that's using ambient, sensor technology. It's collecting data from, the temperature. But if you look at it, I mean, they're carbon monoxide?
Yeah, monoxide.
Carbon monoxide detector. It also, if you have one, it's really cool. Like it actually tracks and it turns on lights. In the night, has like a nighttime setting so that you can see when you're walking. It's really neat. But that says to me, okay, there's other sensors in it.
They know you're walking, for one
thing.
And they know you're there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would like to know and see in the app a list of what information they're collecting and what they did at that time. So that I could actually, if I wanted to go in and say, what do you know about me? It gives me a nice history of what they've shown and what they did. It's almost like if your Chrome browser, you can see your history and it's like cookies for your IoT data. So there's something there that I think has to be developed in educating the public of how sensors are being used, then how they're being displayed.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think people listening to this are going to go, oh, gosh, darn, there's so much. Well, let's face it, the incremental value of an IoT product has everything to do with the information that you derive from the data. And the data is what we're talking about that you're collecting, from the sensor. So, a product brand is thinking, oh, God, do I really have to tell them? Because, geez, they may say no. And then, all of a sudden my values, the value goes down. So, I mean, that is kind of a balancing act, right?
Yeah.
But I think what you're saying is transparency is really important. I mean, from a business point of view, how would you look at it from a business point of view, about privacy?
Yeah, I would say from a business point of view, I think consumers are a little scared of this already. So the irony is the more transparent, the better you will do, and you can actually use that as a competitive advantage. I think the more transparent companies are with this, it lets them feel like they're the ones in control. And they'd be more willing to give it to you. I think Google did this actually pretty well with Google Maps. I think there was a lot of outcry of them knowing where you're at and saying, we're aware of that and we want to show this to you. This is what we've got on you. But the value is there enough for me to keep using it. So as long as you show it to them and show that there's value in the data, people will use it.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I believe that as well. I think there's an implicit bargain that has to be made, or an explicit bargain perhaps has to be made, and then that is, okay, I'm taking this from you, unless you say no. But if you say yes, this is what you're getting in return for giving me this information. So then you decide, right? And I think you're right. Probably more times than not, the reason they're getting the product is for all this cool stuff that it can do. And then if you start saying opt out, opt out, opt out, all of a sudden the interface starts shrinking.
Exactly.
What you can do, right? It's going less and less and less. All of a sudden you're sitting there, okay, I'm a pretty private guy, but also, gosh, I can't really do a heck of a lot. So maybe, maybe that is the key, even from a business point of view. And I think maybe that is the irony that you're mentioning, is that be super transparent, but communicate the value, right?
Yes.
Of what you're doing. But don't try to pull one over, the eyes of the consumer, because that's just going to backfire on you. It may not be the first 1,000, it may not be the first 10,000, but it'll be the 10,000th and one, that'll be someone that's pretty tech savvy and will just sort of roast you. And, all that incremental value that you thought you were getting by collecting this data might just blow back into your face.
Yeah, I agree. Yep.
Okay, so from a technology point of view, you're saying just be cognizant of it. And is this something that's part of a platform generally? Is this something you have to implement on top with your application on top of the platform? Or how do you do this? I mean, basically what you're saying from a technology point of view, mostly from what I got, and expand on it if I'm missing something, was just, notwithstanding the interface and the communication to the user, but it's just basically code that allows you to opt in and opt out in an easy way. Is that it, or is there more to it from a technology point of view?
Yeah, I think it depends on what the customer wants, because I really do think that this idea of privacy is something that the company needs to design with the customer. So
good point. Yeah, good point.
I think it's not something that the platform can provide. I think usually platforms have pro services who may give best practice guidelines on this matter. But honestly, I think this is something that the company itself has to figure out and design with the customer.
Excellent advice. Well, Sean, tell us about Xively and tell us about what's going on and whatever else you want us to hear about.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just be quick. Xively is as you might have guessed, an IoT platform.
Yep.
Which now that's all cleared up, right?
Now that we know exactly what Xively is, yes, that's awesome. Okay, you are not you. So basically, you've told us very little, but go ahead.
So, what Xively's kind of portion of the IoT platform space, I should say, is we have kind of an umbrella terms we're calling connect, manage, engage, where the connect piece is that message bus. So we have a very fast, very secure, very scalable message bus, from that library to the cloud. And then on top of that, we have some of that more boring middleware, which we're calling manage, but is extremely important for doing all the identity and access management piece of the tool, which we didn't even get into that. But I think for security, we believe that identity and access is a massive portion of that. Handling the complexity of all the relationships of people who need to access your data and when and how and why is really difficult. So we kind of handle that portion of it.
Okay. And that's part of the service, right?
That's right. So that's very important and intrinsically tied to the connect portion. And then we also have on top of that an engage layer. And what that means is we have built, we're focused on the connected business itself. So we have built applications for each, or I should say are building applications for the different departments within your business. So you may be getting the same sensor data and metadata off that device, but the product development team needs to see that in a UI that is completely different than your customer service and support team. What we're doing is building department-specific applications that helps them have the most durable data that is most important to them.
Cool. So a separate interface per department is what you're saying.
That's right.
Excellent. Now, where can people find out more about yourself and your company?
Sure. So about myself, I guess you can find me on Twitter. My handle is Sean Lorenz.
Okay.
And at Sean Lorenz. And I would say go to find out about Xively. You can go to Xively.com. It's a weird sounding word, Xively.com. And also, I would say the last piece is we have we're really excited about our first, LogMeIn is having its very first event. We're calling Experience without the E. So,
of course, it's just an X, yes.
Of course, So Experience is coming October 1st and 2nd, and that you can go to experience.xively.com to find out more.
Excellent. Well, we'll put all this in the show analysis notes. So, if you're walking the dog, if you're driving in the car, obviously don't stop. Just come back and look at the notes on the website. But thanks, Sean. I think that was an awesome perspective and very helpful. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Bruce. I enjoyed it.
Okay, that was a good talk with Sean Lorenz. This podcast goes vertical, deep diving into different topics each week. If you prefer a more horizontal and structured approach to learning IoT business and its orbiting technologies, check out my book IoT Inc., published by McGraw-Hill, or become a certified IoT professional by completing the ICIP training and certification program. For details, just go to www.iot-inc.com. Also go to www.iot-inc.com for an analysis of this episode, links to things that were mentioned during the episode, and very importantly, the episode's PDF transcript. Just search for the name of the episode or the guest. If you're new to this podcast, subscribe. That way you'll get every week's episode delivered straight to your device. Or, if you've been listening for a while, there are 3 ways you can support the show. You can leave a rating or a review on iTunes. Just go to iot-inc.com/iTunes. It only takes 1 click to leave a rating, a little bit longer to leave a review. You can share it on social. I'm on LinkedIn, to a lesser extent on Twitter. And of course, you can support the show by buying my book, IoT Inc., or the ICIP training and certification program. That's how I pay the bills. Next week's episode is Horizontal IoT Data and the Internet of Things Platform with Nigel Upton of HP Enterprise. I hope you can join me then. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair. Thank you for listening. Until next week, may your path to IoT business be a clear one.
You have been listening to the IoT Inc. Business Show.